Back in November of 2014, one of the most politically controversial decisions of his presidency, President Obama announced major changes to the way the government would enforce immigration laws. Under the president's plan of deferred action, about 45% of undocumented immigrants would be allowed to stay in the U.S. He said, come on out of the shadows, because the plan gave legal status to 3.8 million people, including 3.5 million parents of U.S. citizens who've been living in the country for at least 5 years. However, this past weekend, ICE agents started conducting raids, detaining at least 121 undocumented immigrants in Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas, including dozens of families with children. Secretary of Homeland Security Jay Johnson said the focus of this weekend's operations were adults and their children who were apprehended after May 1, 2014, crossing the southern border illegally, having exhausted appropriate legal remedies. What in the world? Isn't this the exact thing the president said was going to end? The 2014 plan failed to provide protection for 6.2 million undocumented immigrants. It also applied only to people who entered the U.S. before the beginning of that year. And the raids have sparked outrage from immigrant advocates who question the detainment and deportation of hundreds of nonviolent people, many of them minors, children. Back when he announced his plan in November 2014, President Obama told the country that deporting millions of people is, quote, not who we are. So who are we then? Joining the panel now is Angie Rivera, an undocumented youth advice columnist and a core member of the New York State Youth Leadership Council. What are people in communities saying this week?
Well, we're saying a lot of things, right? We're definitely scared, angry, frustrated, and I think it's one of the biggest hypocrisies, right? To say that we're going to give undocumented youth this deferred action program because we love immigrant youth and their families, and then go on and deport 4-year-olds, right, and their parents, and to say that these raids have just started happening is not true, right? We've seen these raids happen for years. Under the Obama administration, we have deported more than 2 million people, right, in his whole presidency. And so, like, trans immigrants, black immigrants, people with convictions have been saying this is happening, we're being targeted, and it shouldn't have taken this for us to be outraged.
Councilwoman, I guess for me, this was a hard week because I was feeling so good about the president's decisions and public statements around restricting access to guns for around background checks, and then this happening, and I keep thinking, how is this a security priority for the country?
And I was saying the same thing, that yeah, we can praise him on this, but on this one, definitely it's a wrong move. New York City, we take pride in the work that we have done to embrace our undocumented immigrant communities, because we know the vast majority come here and are looking for refuge and to provide for their families and are contributing positively to our city. So not to see these children who are refugees, they're seeking a slight asylum from extremely violent, horrific situations, now being rounded up and sent back, it is not who we are. And so the city of New York has invested resources. The council has taken the leadership to provide legal resources for every single undocumented and unaccompanied minor that is here and facing deportation proceedings. We have been buffered to a certain extent from these round of raids, I believe, because of the work that we've done, despite the inaction at the federal level. So this is deplorable, it is horrific, and it is sending hysteria and real concern across communities, and it is putting people back into the shadows. So this is very counterproductive, and I thank all of the Democratic leaders who have stood up and said this has to stop, and stop now.
And the word you just used there, to me, is so critical, and it's critical even from the perspective of legal status. Many of these folks are refugees, right, which is a different sort of story than kind of an economic immigrant, someone coming looking for opportunity, which is its own, I think, potentially at least morally neutral kind of thing. But as a legal matter, trying to escape a circumstance of extraordinary violence in Central and South America, shouldn't that provide some protections here?
Oh, absolutely, and it does provide protections if you do it right. We have always in this country been very willfully confused about people who are coming for economic opportunities and people who are refugees. There are two entirely different categories. It happens in Central America, it happens in South America, it happens in the Caribbean. And we just close our eyes to this and we sort of see the brown people coming in. Are they going to work for us? No, we're going to send them back. It's crazy. But here's what people need to understand. And I completely agree with the speaker. In New York City and New York State have done an outstanding job, because a lot of the communities, we take care of our people, and that for communities coming from Honduras and a lot of these places, they settle in New York State, and they don't just need to be warehoused somewhere. There needs to be family reunification. There needs to be mental health services. There need to be help figuring out how to document what's been happening to them. And I would point out that we shouldn't believe the rhetoric that this is just because of gang violence in Central America. This is also because of political instability. And let's go back to the 2009 Honduras coup.
I was going to say, and who's responsible in part for that?
I'm just saying, we had a whole lawsuit about that at the Center for Constitutional Rights. So we need to unpack what's happening, but we should not, and I'm happy to hear people on this panel say this, we should not give the president a pass on this, because this is really one of the most outrageous and one of the saddest parts of his presidency.
So Angie, then how do you address the question of political accountability for a community that, of course, doesn't actually have the vote? How do you hold the administration accountable for these efforts which are creating such fear and terror in communities?
Well, I think something that's been really amazing about the immigrant rights movement is that undocumented youth have stepped out of the shadows and have conducted actions. Even just yesterday, right? They were blocking detention centers and being arrested here in New York City. And so it's so critical for us to hold elected officials accountable, all of them, right? Because we were so focused on the comments Trump was making while not holding this administration accountable that allows these mass raids to happen.
Will the immigrant rights community, like the Black Lives Matter community, inject this into the conversation, particularly for the Democratic primary?
Yes, most definitely. I think the immigrant rights movement and Black Lives Matter have so much in common to fight for right now, because all of our communities are under attack, and this enforcement, right? It's not just immigration, but it's also NYPD, it's also the FBI, and so all of us are definitely working together to make sure that this does not happen, because one deportation is too many.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Melissa, Mark, Viva Raton.
Viva Rito.
Viva Rito. I'm sorry, the way it's spelled was bizarre. And not because it's actually spelled that way, but it was my prompter odd. And Angie Rivera, Jonathan Metzel, and Vince Warren are going to be back in our next hour. But coming up,